Professors and university employees of Reddit, what behind the scenes campus drama went on that students never knew about? Professors were purchasing tricked out laptops with their budgets shortly before leaving the university. The university in turn would let the professors purchase the hardware for a song because it was used. We're talking 2000 3000 euros machines being purchased 6 months down the line for 500 euros. Someone finally caught onto this scheme and now nobody can purchase the used hardware. And these shenanigans are why I'm not allowed to buy my thoroughly used project laptop even though the project is over and my supervisor has admitted they have no use for it whatsoever. I work for a prominent university in Japan. My Japanese colleagues tend to follow all rules very strictly and blindly follow manuals. One day an American professor had to rush to the US to see his dying mother. The staff members of class operations called him as he was grieving, asking him to still teach classes and review reports. Obviously, the lack of empathy and inflexibility led the professor to take his bags and work for another school. Students never knew the true reason why he stopped teaching. My teacher was Syrian. He was practically always at university, always tired, always acting off, would sleep in his office, would forget to hand back assignments, would mix up basic things, cry randomly in the hallway. We later found out his family was being held hostage back home while he was teaching in Canada. Oh my god, that's so sad. Night shift janitor made some really good moonshine. Some of the professors and grad students would leave cash in our top desk drawers when we left work, and the next day, a mason jar of handmade shine would be waiting there. He's since moved on from that department, but was good people. It would have been really weird if someone didn't know about that system, left some cash in their desk, showed up the next day, find out they've been robbed, but the moonshine fairy had left them a gift. Research fellow at University of Exeter UK here. We recently had all our office bins removed as part of a new policy to try and improve recycling. Got lots of mass emails replying with tons of sass and annoyance. One professor just replied, "What next? Do you expect us to drive to the local skip? TBH, it's just really annoying not having a bin in our shared office. The worst part is now everyone brings in their own plastic bags to use as a temporary bin for the day, and then we end up having a ton of people trying to get them into one bin that is shared by the floor." 2 professors arrested for M production. One for murdering his wife with lab supplies. Another stepped down quietly for embezzlement. And that's how we replaced half our chemistry department in a year. I'm noticing a trend between chemistry and murder in this post. In the English department, one of the professors got arrested for domestic violence, divorced his wife, then got another English professor pregnant and eventually married her, and they all saw each other at department meetings. Super awkward. Either this is a coincidence or we went to the same school. Grades came out. At that time they were printed. The burst of the device that cut the grade cards up into a mailable format has a torn belt. We could not in any way get a replacement belt from the manufacturer, so we measured how long the belt needed to be. Then we went to an auto parts store and looked at a lot of belts before we settled on one and bought it. It fit the burster and we had all the grade cards mailed that night. This may be the most wholesome story in this entire thread. When I was going through my PhD program, a buddy of mine had his professor die on him. Young guy, in his 40s, got hit by a car. Boom. Not so fun fact, when a professor dies, their grants go away. If a grad student is on the verge of finishing, just writing up their results, they can sometimes hop to another lab and get by. My friend, however, was only in his 2nd year. He had to start over with a new project in a new lab. Essentially lost 2 years of his life on a project that yielded absolutely nothing. Whoa. Grad school, so uplifting. That happened recently at my university as well. A couple of my fellow grad students were basically made lab homeless as their professor died in a freak horseback riding accident. She was pretty young, so it was quite tragic for everyone involved. I worked for the maintenance department one summer while in college, and got exposed to a lot of the drama in that department. Highlights include the school deciding that they didn't want to deal with the union anymore, so they started hiring for all non-teaching positions as temps, then firing them after 6 months and rehiring them 30 days later. This was done because temps didn't have to be union, and also because once a large enough percentage of employees were non-union, they could start hiring non-union employees on a permanent basis. The entire third shift cleaning crew, except the team lead, was made up of people with disciplinary issues. This included a man who's been caught multiple times stealing panties and setting up cameras in girls' showers, at least once. The girl in question was underage. None of this was ever told to the students. The head of facilities and planning knew this was an issue and just did checks on all the bathrooms in the building. This guy cleaned once or twice a month. I worked at a large university, and right before I started, the longtime dean of the school went on sabbatical. I didn't think anything of it until 2 months later when I found out that the university forced him to take time off because he blew almost all of the school's budget on fancy dinners with donors. We're talking like $1,000 plus on alcohol-heavy meals. Showed up to official university events ILC, and kept a second admin assistant as essentially his sex slave. He had a private bathroom with a shower installed in his office. He sent the school into a major budget crisis and was a PR disaster waiting to happen. It was a huge mess. The acting dean who stepped in got a lot of crap for how much damage control she had to do. Ultimately, he returned a few years later just as a part-time faculty member. But still, totally wild. One of our male English professors was being stalked by a female student, to the point he had to get a restraining order against her. The only reason my class knew was because she saw him in the hallway, entered our classroom and made a huge scene the first day of class, and security had to be called to make her leave. After that, the door was always locked for that class, and whoever was in the back row were scouters to let in late students. He also had to cancel class to go to court for the situation at least once. In our chemistry department a few years back, a grad student who was failing started poisoning another graduate student they worked with closely by putting carcinogens in their foods and drinks. Colorless, odorless, flavorless. Thanks to his chemistry knowledge, he was eventually caught, and I'm not sure what happened to him. Thrown out for sure, perhaps arrested. Another year, a grad student pushed another student down a flight of steps to try to kill them. Chemists are crazy. Prominent professor was sleeping with his students. Actually, he met his wife that way, and then had a huge issue with dating other students after getting married. Lawsuits were threatened. He resigned and moved 3,000. Edit: this was exaggerated by about 2,000 miles away very quickly. No news, no public info released. It was all just known through the grapevine of staff. Our heads of department or course directors would purposely keep dragging students, the act of pulling a student through their studies, even though they'd fail most classes. They'd purposely grade the student just above a pass even though the content of work was astonishingly bad, because if they left or dropped out it'd look bad on the course's stats and dropout rate. Not to mention the university not getting the student loan money. From there, of course, statistics would be ridiculously high for that particular degree, so they'd then sell this to prospective students and parents. This is currently still going on. Source: I'm a lecturer at a university, and yes, it disgusts me. Sadly the norm. I worked in an institute that at the end of the year the head was calling students who hadn't been in over 6 months, telling them to come in to complete their qualification. Higher pass rates equals maintain government funding. They also claimed at graduation that 90% of students ended up working in the industry or going on to further education. The number was more likely 5%. A professor was hired to start a research center institute, got paid a lot of money and came in with tenure. He was freaking weird to begin with, but as time went on it became apparent that he wasted all the funds intended for starting the center. Nothing was happening but the accounts were diminishing. The whistleblower hotline was provided with a bunch of data that strongly suggested he was funneling a lot of that money to a company owned in part by his brother, in addition to a lot of blatant and casual misuse of funds, buying personal and convenience stuff for himself and staff. Things started heating up and they called him in for a hearing about it. The very next day we found an indignant letter announcing his resignation and accusing the entire department and college of unethical behavior slipped under the door. He skipped out in the middle of the night, leaving a big pile of deliberately damaged equipment in his office. The university didn't pursue him. I believe it was because they were in the middle of a scandal involving faculty and students in another department and just didn't want to hear about it. Students were completely unaware. You mean, aside from the normal infighting between factions, character assassination carried out in formal language at review promotion tenure committee meetings, grad student poaching, running crying to a dean, etc? This makes me want a Veep meets Game of Thrones show about a university faculty. My PI professor for grad school had his lab raided by the FBI. This happened long before I joined. Apparently, one of his first or second class of grad students in the 80s 90s decided that they wanted to use lab resources to brew some very easy to do with the equipment we have. From what I am told, this student would stay late in lab after others had left to get this done. In Breaking Bad style, he fences his drugs to some distributor and thought that was the end of it. The purity of his drugs was enough that they were able to trace it back from the streets to him and the lab. A sting operation shut down the lab, while the dust settled, and my professor was cleared of all wrongdoing, since none of this was under his direct control, and all campus resources were being misused by the student. State Intelligence Bureau told the professor that it was the largest and purest operation they had seen in the state at this time. Being caught because your product is too good is quite ironic. Not sure how they'd be able to tell which lab though. If it's pure, the only information you have is they use the pro equipment and know how to do it properly, not which lab made it. I think students would be surprised just how much drama happens. I am talking everything from major drama like lawsuits that universities have kept quiet or EO complaints to colleagues bitching at each other because one thought the other one rolled her eyes at the other one. I just went to a faculty meeting that was so tense and angry that I legitimately wanted to leave the room, and it was over a small wording difference of opinion in a policy that literally does not matter because it is departmental and not university wide, so it's going to get struck down anyway. Anyway, sometimes I am happy to go to class or meet with students in my office because that is the fun part of the job, and usually drama free until the last week of classes when everyone starts hustling for a higher grade. Having peeked behind the scenes as college staff, I was definitely shocked at how much drama there is. It amazed me that professors that I had once taken classes with and respected could act worse than high school students. The levels of jealousy, resentment, backstabbing, and outright lying deceit are absurd. I was a grad student in a major university. The department pretty much all loathed one another, and the professors had multiple alliances that were probably more complex than any game of Civ you'll play. At one point in time, a group of professors had aligned to overthrow the dean, and they were so successful in doing so that the dean wasn't fired. They were demoted to department secretary. It was brutal. I had a colleague who had people on their doc committee get into an argument and refuse to sign off on anything they did, not because of the quality of the work, but because the professors hated each other. The professors had multiple alliances that were probably more complex than any game of Civ you'll play. This has been true of every large department I've ever dealt with. Currently it's at head of one of our research institutes, and few of his colleagues somehow award themselves about $1 million USD each as a bonus. In my country it takes about 70 years of work on AVG salary to get that money. Also, the same prof possibly forged some data in paper 10 years ago. Who knows how it's gonna end, but sure, more dirt is being pulled on other PPL as well. Whoa, I hope you are keeping records of all this. For posterity, not for blackmailing those sobs. Definitely not that. I work at a college in the Midwest. A few years ago, our president very quickly resigned. Turns out his son was growing weed in their basement and was selling out of their house. Whether the president knew or not is still being debated, but he still resigned. Oh, I thought my son was working on a long-term botany project assigned to him by Professor Mary Jane in his RM 420 class. I swear I had no idea what he was really up to, officer. I had an advanced calculus teacher who'd come into class stoned out of his mind. He'd write down equations on the board from a book, and about 15-20 minutes in, he'd invariably excuse himself and take a bathroom break. He'd then return, coked out of his mind, and proceed to solve all equations in less than 5 minutes and non-stop monologued about the topic for another 5, then dismissed the class and stormed out, invariably if you actually understood or not. Most students seemed physically stunned and dazed by the whole process. I don't know whether he was a freaking genius or a deranged drug fiend, but I studied in a big university at the time, and recently I heard he was made head teacher of the math department. so I don't know what to think. A few years ago an adjunct lecturer found out his contract was not being renewed. He peed in the corner of his office before turning in his keys. It took a lot of time and a lot of cleaning, along with a new carpet, to get rid of the smell. Remembering this one if I'll ever need to really burn the bridges to anywhere, but probably using some hidden closet instead. The provost's office recommended a cost-cutting change in scheduling. The chair of the department I was in wrote a memo, not disagreeing, but only saying that the change would require careful planning to not disrupt the quality of the teaching, and that it may not be possible during the current school year to get the various curriculum changes approved. The provost pitched a hissy fit and cancelled one of the department's tenure lines. Obviously everybody who was tenured couldn't be gotten rid of, but there were 2 not yet tenured professors, and the chair had to pick one to fire, as his punishment for not being sufficiently servile. And it wasn't even for anything, just that the provost gave an order and they didn't snap to attention fast enough for his liking. He didn't care that they'd be getting rid of a good teacher, or replacing with a bunch of adjuncts at the last minute. He just wanted to make a point. The lady who got fired was one of the best profs in the department. The students loved her, but the other one, also no slouch, had more seniority. I used to be a custodian at a prominent university, and one of the TAs in the art department would routinely leave her studio a pigsty and then assured her students not to sweat the mess. We're just giving the janitor something to do. A number of students complained about her sense of entitlement, and she was rejected for a professorship for calling me a janitor instead of the proper nomenclature, custodian. I was a professorial assistant to the Italian department, and one of my favorite professors did a showing of a very famous Italian film Swept Away on a weekend. This was an outside of class activity, which no one was required to attend, at a college with college-age students. We don't have time to watch this in class, so we'll watch it over the weekend in the auditorium. The movie in question would be considered controversial by American standards, but Italian film standards it is also controversial, but considered a pretty important film for anyone studying film. It deals with some pretty intense issues involving dynamics between men and women, wealthy and poor, as well as, depending on your interpretation, a rape scene. I was working in the department when we did this movie showing, and so I got a front row view of it blowing up. Apparently some freshmen, who are 18 years old, attended the screening and complained to their parents, who complained to the school. The school decided the best option was to fire my professor. The Italian department went to bat for him, reminding the school that adult students attended the screening voluntarily. The school knew they couldn't get away with firing him specifically for that, so at the end of the quarter they revoked his contract renewal. He was supposed to come back the next year, for lifestyle choices that conflict with university standards. Dumb move. I don't know who on the university's legal team wrote it that way, but they should be fired. The professor in question was Pakistani and openly gay, living with his husband. As far as I understand it, he took their asses to court for discriminatory dismissal. They settled out of court for an unknown sum, but it was enough that my professor and his husband moved out to Italy, where he now works at a university there and is very happy. No one outside of the Italian department knew what happened. Professor was there one quarter and gone the next with no warning whatsoever. Wow, you have to be some kind of stupid to fire a gay man for reasons of lifestyle choices. That's like a guaranteed lawsuit. Academia sometimes draws ridiculous people. I had a dean once who caused so much turmoil so often by simply denying objective reality when it didn't suit her. I remember spearheading a project to repurpose a section of our building. I got the plans and she refused to believe the blueprints on square footage, so I measured it myself. She pretended it wasn't the case. It wasn't large enough to accommodate its new purpose, but according to her it was because in her mind it was 30% larger. I went over her head and ended up in meetings with higher administration trying to get them to understand. They all took her side. She proceeded to make my life heck for the remainder of my time at the university. That's horrible. It's amazing how incompetent people ever get promoted to positions like that. can't post on my main account because it would be super obvious which university I work for. Our last provost was on an interim basis after a quick succession of 2 others had been fired. I assume they wanted to take some time naming the next provost because it's a big commitment. Provost search committee is formed, and every criteria is aimed at naming the interim as the permanent provost. This is the second highest position in the university after the president. Interim provost, IP, is in the job for months and is in charge of a huge university-wide development plan. Seriously, the plan that is going to guide our path for at least the next 10 years, probably more, millions, possibly billions of dollars will go into this plan that is being sold as the future of making our university a top-tier research institution. IP is sent around the country to sell this plan to alumni and donors. He talks a big game and makes it sound like he has dedicated his entire life and career into the university. But just as this development plan is going to the regents for a vote, IP is confronted on the steps of the admin building by the husband of one of the women who works in his office. IP and the woman had been having an affair while they are both married to other people. One of my colleagues had seen them at the airport together, but didn't think anything of it since they were both in very top positions and could have been traveling together on university business. But yeah, they were just about to announce that he had the permanent position, vote on the new development plan, and his mistress's husband fought him on the steps of a building in the middle of campus in the middle of the day. He resigned to spend more time in prayerful reflection with his family. I'm sure there are plenty of people who know about this, but most students just would not have cared. The university wants to do everything they can to keep it quiet because we have a reputation to maintain. One professor punched another professor in the face for staying in the classroom a minute over class time with 9 minutes before Professor Punchy's class even started. Both professors are still working in the department and I have no idea how the school kept it quiet. I dated a woman who worked as a professor in a nearby college. After the end of her second year working there, she quit and disappeared from academia completely. Apparently she had lied about her background, specifically that she had spent time in jail. The college was planning on updating how extensive their background check was and she was gonna be out of a job anyway. Not an employee, but was very close to a professor who spilled a lot of tea. The entire internal structure of my then university was changing to a much more centralized and controlling scheme. All the good lecturers and professors who could find employment elsewhere have left or was in the process of leaving. Everybody hated it. They were the top university and its global rankings slipped from top 50 to outside top 100. Was on a grand jury. One of the deans of a community college was finance officer for some kind of club campus organization that was mothballed, but for some reason they never closed out the bank account associated with the organization. She eventually became the preparer and approver for that account and quickly went about paying her condo fees with money that was still being directed to the account. I don't recall why it was still being replenished. She also gave one of her relatives a no-show job tutoring students paid out of the account and they ended up splitting the salary. We sent that one off to trial. She was fricked. Sounds like someone in accounting had a resume generating event. Our dean of students was a really fun, charismatic guy. Everyone loved him because he would do awesome speeches at orientation and was super energetic and nice to anyone he met on the street. Literally no one had anything bad to say about this dude. Turns out he's secretly a raging alcoholic. There was a few month period where he straight up disappeared off the face of the planet during the middle of summer, prime orientation period. He missed a bunch of orientations and the director of orientation did his speeches for him. She was not a good orator. Then rumor went around that he was secretly an alcoholic and the school forced him to go to rehab or he would have been fired. They kept it real hush hush too cause this dude has such a pristine reputation among the current students there could have easily been a revolt over his firing. I hope he's doing okay. Sounds bittersweet but I'm glad they gave him rehab as an option and noticed how valued he is to their school. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.